Hello. Hi, you guys. How are you? My name's Nikki C. Patterson. I am the owner and operator of I Prevail K through 12 Educational Consulting and I Prevail K through 12 Academic Learning Center. In this capacity, I help parents disrupt the one size fits all policies, practices, and procedures of the public school system so that their child can receive a quality education. And on today, we held our first masterclass. This was a free question and answer session for all parents to attend so that they can get answers to their questions about what's going to happen, what's going on, and anything they had on their heart, I was answering it. So I am excited to say that God just showed up and He showed out. It was a really, really exciting time. I was nervous, so a lot of my nervousness came through, but nonetheless, we did have the class, and I am excited that God did what He said He was going to do. So that's exciting to me. One thing I am here to discuss is one of the questions that came about. We had parents from all over, but there were some, there was a question that came about from our recent board meeting. And this question got a lot of engagement. And basically, the question wanted to know, what are we going to do now? If you haven't been following my page, then I shared, first of all, I'm from Assumption Parish in Louisiana. And in Assumption Parish, our board just recently opted out of renewing our superintendent's contract. So if you know anything that's going on now in the public school system, of course, we're all dealing with the quarantine and the schools have been forced to close. And so now the students are in quarantine and a lot of them are having distance learning experiences. And so a lot of things are up in the air. And now, in addition to all of that, our superintendent is now going to be leaving on June 30th. So we'll be looking for a new superintendent who's going to have to come in and get acclimated to what's going on, the policies, practices, and procedures of the public school system. But that's also going to mean there's a learning curve there. And so the parents had a question, what's going to happen? How can we as parents prepare? If this is going to be a quality education training, then how can we as parents prepare for our children to receive a quality education on next year? And so I thought that was a great question. Some things that we are going to do. If you hear the rain, guys, it is pouring. It just started pouring. So I'm like, you know what? Nobody's going to steal this joy. So I'm excited. So I'm going to continue with this live. One thing that came about from the live video, if you're not familiar with it, I did share it on my page. And it was a Zoom meeting. And the Zoom meeting, basically, it had the board members to discuss their concerns as to why they wanted to or would not renew the superintendent's contract. And the superintendent had a 2-year contract. They wanted an extension. Some board members did. Some members said that they did not want to extend it. The parents are concerned, where does their child fall in with this? And so with that, I'm going to share some things that I shared with them and some noticeable things during the board meeting that we as parents can take and make note of, but also some things that we can do. So I'll give you 3 tips after I make some notes about what happened during the board meeting, and then I'll give you 3 tips to help your child receive a quality education during the 2020-2021 school year. So first things first, although the superintendent asked that his contract be paid out and he be placed on paid administrative leave, that has to go through the board and lawyers and different things, so that's not granted. However, one thing that we do know is that the superintendent's contract does not end until June 30th. So until June 30th, the current superintendent will still be Assumption Parish superintendent. One thing that I did notice, and a lot of parents, and I've been sharing it, even though the superintendent's been in the district for 2 years, the schools that were failing prior to him coming into the school district, those schools are still failing. The schools that were succeeding prior to the superintendent coming into the school district, those schools are still succeeding. And so there was not much change in there. So we did propose Big Ten goals to say how we're going to improve the district. We want to make Assumption High School an A, whoop whoop, which happened. But we want to also make Assumption Parish School District an A district. And one of the questions that I proposed at last year's town hall meeting was, how can you present Big Ten goals when you have failing schools that are servicing black students and none of those goals pertain to those black schools or those schools that are low performing? You have generic goals that are going to help the district as a whole, but those schools, after those goals are met, are still not going to be actually taken account for and given a plan to succeed. So how are you going to do that? Well, we have 10 goals and none of them still account for that. So that's one of the things that I wanted to make note of. Whoever comes in, we definitely need to look at individually what do those schools need to succeed and how are the other schools succeeding and what are some metrics that we can take from those schools to help those low performing schools succeed. The other thing was one thing that was glaringly obvious. They had a comment section where you can either call in and speak or you could have written in and spoken. And the comments that came in were, first and foremost, our board is split, and I'm just going to say it, along racial lines. We have 4 black board members, we have 4 white board members. The black board members voted to not renew the contract. The white board members voted to renew the contract. And then there was one white board member who basically he considered himself an independent, and he votes based on what the policies, practices, and what his findings are from the data. And so he voted not to renew the contract. But what I noticed was every parent that contacted or called in or wrote in was in support of keeping the superintendent. Guess what else I noticed? Each one of those parents were white. We didn't have any support for our black board members who were voicing their concerns that, hey, you know what, I'm in a district and my schools are not performing well. That means the people that are in my communities, they're not getting a quality education. So if you've been here for 2 years and those schools aren't performing well, then we're probably going to go in a different direction. And one thing that I would have liked to have seen is some of our parents who felt or supported that to get behind our board members and say, hey, you know what, I agree. We didn't see that. However, the board members that were in favor of it, those constituents from their communities, they were there, they were showing their love, their support for keeping the superintendent. And one thing that I noticed is their schools are already succeeding. So in their minds, he's doing a great job. But if we felt differently, I didn't see any support that says we're going to support our board members who are looking out for our children's best interest. And so that's something definitely we want to take into consideration when we're going to come into the 2020-2021 school year. Where is your support? We saw a lot of support outside of the meeting. We saw a lot of support on social media afterwards, and we're going back and we're seeing we have a victory, but our schools are still failing. So where's the victory? We may have had a victory to say, hey, you know what? We finally, after years and years, the board is turned into our favor. But at the end of the day, we still need to make changes. We still need to support our board members to say, you know what, you're doing a great job. You had my voice. You had my concerns in mind when you were voting. But here's some other concerns that I have. When we need to be the people that give them those concerns. They are voting for us. And so that was such a huge thing that I noticed. And so one thing that I want to say is if we remain silent when people are fighting for us, then guess what happens? Nothing changes. And the people that are opposing us, their voice gets stronger and stronger. And that voice got so strong that it made it all the way to the media. And the media reported it as the superintendent was ousted from Assumption Parish based on racial divides. But we never, as strong as we were when the superintendent came in, on social media, in our communities, text messages, group messages, whatever it may have been, we never allowed our voice to get so loud that it went to the media when he came in on racial party lines. So one thing that we need to do is we need to stop being reactionary, and we really need to be proactive. How can we step up and be the people that our children need? How can we be advocates for our children? Everyone else is doing it, but for whatever reason, we feel like we are our voice doesn't count, or our voice doesn't matter, or it doesn't need to be heard. It does need to be heard, and this is the time where we need to go in and support those people and say, hey, you know what, thank you. I don't know all the problems that's going on, but you're there, you're representing us, and I thank you for whatever you've done, because our schools are failing. In 2 years, if we can get to the high school and get that school to be an A, then why is it that our schools in the black communities, or majority black schools, have not changed, have not made any progress? And so I, for one, definitely saw that, and saw that the parents in the successful schools or in the communities where the schools were succeeding, they were there in numbers and droves, and they were really just vocal, not just on social media afterwards and saying, hey, we want to incorporate our schools and we want to break away from assumption, they were there in the meeting and saying, hey, he's doing a great job, we love him. They were showing, just all sorts of things, and we should have had that same support from the Black communities. And so one thing that I would always tell parents as I'm going to go into these tips, that's how our schools fail. When we don't take an active role in what's happening with our children and what's policies and practices and procedures are going on, and we allow one person to speak for us, or we allow a small group to speak for the whole community, and we say that's not our concern, that's not our issue. And then when it gets too big, guess what happens? We as a people can't fight it anymore because it's out of our control. This is the first time that our board has control to speak for our issues, for our children, for our communities. And we're not supporting them like we should be. And that is going to hurt us in the long run. So here are 3 tips that we can do to stand up and be accounted for, but also to ensure that your child gets a quality education. First of all, we know that there's going to be a new superintendent. Guess what? It's going to be voted in. Go to the meetings, state your concerns. Make sure that if you can get on the agenda, get on the agenda. Speak whatever it is that you need to speak. It's not about favoritism or anything, because guess what? Most of our communities, we don't have as many communities as far as middle class communities, so we can definitely stand to help our communities get some tax dollars and get some grants and different things into our communities. But our schools need to be performing better. So we need to be speaking out and speaking up. What do our schools need? The next thing is find out what's expected of your child for the next grade level. Don't wait until your child gets to school and then all of a sudden say, my child's teacher is going to handle that for me. No, that's what happened. We figured our board members were going to handle it, but when our board members were getting clobbered, not just by their constituents, but also not just by their peers, but by the communities that did not support their voice. We should have been there in numbers and said, hey, you know what? Let's support them. But we were talking outside of the meeting, and that's going to hurt us more than it's going to help us. It's also going to hurt our children. The other thing, make sure you know what's going on. Volunteer, partner with the schools. The one thing that people can say is they always saw me, because guess what? But when you heard about me, did you hear that I was cursing or I was fighting or I was No, you just heard or saw my presence, because that's not me. I wanted to be a force, but I didn't need to be loud. I didn't need to be angry or obnoxious or anything. I just needed you to feel my presence. And so you can see that I was a parent who not only was concerned, but I was going to be involved. So we knew what our child's bus route was, because guess what? The first day of school, we were following that bus. We wanted to make sure if that bus broke down or any complications or anything happened, we knew where his bus route was. We got his bus driver's number. We knew what seat he was supposed to be sitting in. When the bus pulled up at school, we had his supplies. We didn't drop him off beforehand. We wanted to meet his teachers. So we met with each one of his teachers, dropped his supplies off. For lunch, hey, you know what? We're bringing his lunch because we want to see what his lunch environment is like and what's going on. No one could tell me anything about what was going on and had to report to me, because we saw the environment for ourselves. And so that's one thing that I would always say. The other thing is start pulling the standards. What grade is your child going to? How is that going to be impacted? And how do you impact what's going to happen with your child's grade? What are they expected to learn? One of the biggest things that I could always remember is when I went into a parent-teacher meeting, and the principal, well, assistant principal at that time, she was in a Black school, and she said, Nikki, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're the only one that would come here and want to know what we're doing for your child, as far as does the test match the standard, and does what the teacher's teaching match what the student needs to know. The other parents, all they want to know is, are we cutting and coloring, and do we love their child? And I was flabbergasted, because you had directors, you had the principal, you had teachers, everyone sitting in here, and I was flabbergasted because I'm sitting here waiting on one of them to speak. Because you're in a low performing school, why would you say something like that? Well, here's what happened. I spoke. I said, I don't see any test question that asks, do you love my child? I see test questions that said, did this child master this standard? I see test questions that say, did this child master this standard? I don't see any that says, cut and color this and let me see how well you do. I said, so if your expectations are that low for those children, then imagine if I'm not here, how low your expectations will be for my child. And that's unacceptable. So I needed to know what my son needed to know, so I can go in there prepared to ask questions. Is this happening? And if it's not happening, what are you going to do to make sure that it starts happening? And then the last one, guys, voice your concerns. You know what you want for your child. You know what quality looks like, and you know what quality doesn't look like. If you're not in there, then of course you can't voice your concerns. If you're not partnering, then you can't voice your concerns. But if you know something and you're afraid to voice your concern because you don't want to be seen as the loudmouth or the parent who is always involved or the parent who, then guess what happens to your child's education? They're not going to get the best education possible. So I would rather be seen as the parent who than the student who, or the child who, or, oh, that child could have gone far. But what happened? Why didn't they? And I'm tired of taking wooden nickels for anybody in my family, especially my son. So I'm going to stand up, I'm going to step up, and I'm going to be accounted for. And I pray that this video has given you some tips, some tools, and some strategies to be accounted for. A lot of times people come in and they say, hey, why are you so serious? Because this is a serious matter. We have a school to prison pipeline system that has created mass incarceration in the Black community. But it started with the convict leasing program after slavery. So it goes far back where people are creating policies and practices that do not help us to grow as a people. And until we start tearing them down at the basic or the local level, then they're going to continue to come from the federal level and hurt us and hurt our communities, hurt our culture, hurt our next generation. And I, for one, am not ready to give my son's future to anyone. So anything that I can do to fight, I will. So that's what this video was. And like I said, this was one of the questions that came up, and this was one of the things that was still on my heart from the meeting. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Another question was a reading, but I'm going to come in with another video on another day for that, so that we can address that. But if you have any questions, please email me, info@nikkicpatterson.com, or you can visit my website to see what's going on and how I've helped my son to improve, www.nikkicpatterson.com. Or you can check us out on Facebook, Nikki C. Patterson, or I Prevail K through 12 Educational Consulting, or YouTube. I drop daily YouTube videos to help my son, Nikki C. Patterson. Guys, please hit us up. Please get involved. And please support those people who support you. Thanks, and have a blessed day. Bye.